The summer of 1940, France has fallen. In 6 stunning weeks, the German war machine has crushed the strongest army in Europe. Poland, Denmark, Norway, Holland, Belgium, all gone. The swastika flies from the Arctic Circle to the Pyrenees. And now, across a narrow strip of gray water, barely 20 miles wide, Adolf Hitler looks at the last enemy still standing: Britain, alone. Her army has just escaped annihilation at Dunkirk, leaving nearly all of its weapons behind on the beaches. Her allies are gone. Across the world, many believe her surrender is only a matter of weeks. Even within Britain, there are whispers that the war is lost, and that it is time to make a deal. But between Hitler and victory stands one final obstacle. Before any invasion fleet can cross the Channel, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, the most feared air weapon on Earth, must first destroy the Royal Air Force. Its commanders promise it will take a few weeks. Against them stands a force of young men with an average age of just 20 years. Pilots so few in number that their prime minister will immortalize them with a single word: the few. Through one long summer, the fate of the free world will be decided 5 miles above the fields of southern England. By a few hundred exhausted young men climbing into their cockpits again and again and again until they win, or until there are none of them left. This is the Battle of Britain. Welcome to Historical Club. To understand this battle, you must first understand just how alone Britain truly was in the summer of 1940. The disaster in France had been total. The British Expeditionary Force had been saved from the beaches of Dunkirk by a miracle of small ships. Over 300,000 men brought home. But an army's men are not an army. The tanks, the artillery, the trucks, the heavy weapons, nearly all of it lay abandoned in France. If German soldiers landed in England that summer, there was pitifully little to stop them. America was neutral. The Soviet Union stood aside under its pact with Hitler. And in London, a new prime minister, Winston Churchill, in office barely a month, stood before Parliament and made Britain's answer to the whispers of surrender. They would fight on the beaches. They would fight in the fields and in the streets. They would never surrender. And as France collapsed, he told his people plainly what was coming. The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Hitler's plan carried the codename Operation Sea Lion, a massive amphibious invasion across the Channel. But every German commander knew the truth. No invasion barge would survive the crossing while the Royal Air Force still flew, and while the Royal Navy still ruled the sea. The RAF had to die first. The task fell to Hermann Göring, chief of the Luftwaffe, vain, boastful, and supremely confident. His pilots were veterans of Spain, Poland, and France. Nothing had ever stopped them. He promised the Führer that the RAF would be swept from the skies in a matter of weeks. On paper, the odds were brutal. The Luftwaffe could hurl well over 2,000 aircraft against Britain. RAF Fighter Command could put up only a fraction of that number of fighters. And, more dangerously still, it was desperately short of the one thing no factory could produce: trained pilots. But Britain held hidden cards, and together, they formed the most advanced air defense system on Earth. The first was radar. Along the English coast stood chains of tall steel towers that could detect German formations while they were still assembling over France. Invisible eyes that stripped away the attacker's greatest weapon: surprise. The second was the system built around it, the masterpiece of Fighter Command's quiet, unglamorous chief, Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding. Radar plots, reports from ground observers, radio direction, all of it flowed into operations rooms where it was filtered, plotted on great map tables, and turned into orders in minutes. This meant British fighters did not have to patrol endlessly, wasting fuel and engines and men. They could sit on the ground, resting, refueling, rearming, and rise only when and where they were needed. It was the world's first integrated air defense system, and the Germans never truly understood they were fighting it. They bombed the radar towers, then, judging them too hard to destroy, largely gave up. It was one of the costliest misjudgments of the entire war. The third was the machines. The rugged, workhorse Hawker Hurricane, which would do the greater share of the killing, and the beautiful, deadly Supermarine Spitfire, the one fighter in the world that could meet Germany's Messerschmitt 109 on equal terms. And behind the machines stood the factories. Under the ruthless drive of the Minister for Aircraft Production, British industry was turning out new fighters faster than the Germans were destroying them. Faster, indeed, than German intelligence believed possible. Britain could replace its aircraft. What it could not easily replace was the men inside them. And the fourth was simple geography. This battle would be fought over England. A German pilot who bailed out became a prisoner. A British pilot who bailed out could be back with his squadron by evening, sometimes flying again the same day. And every German fighter flew at the end of a fuel leash, with barely minutes of combat time over London before the red warning light forced it home across the sea. The battle built through the summer like a gathering storm. In July, the Luftwaffe struck at convoys in the Channel and probed the coastal defenses. Then, in August, Göring unleashed the true offensive, Eagle attack, designed to smash fighter command in southern England once and for all. Massive raids hammered the radar towers and the fighter airfields. Day after day, the sky over Kent and Sussex filled with contrails as formations of hundreds of German aircraft crossed the coast, and the squadrons of fighter command, outnumbered again and again, climbed to meet them. The fighting was unlike anything in human experience. Combat at 300 miles per hour, 5 miles above the earth, in freezing air, where a pilot who lost track of the sky around him for 3 seconds could die without ever seeing the man who killed him. Young men, 20, 21, some still in their teens, flew 3, 4, 5 sorties a day. They fell asleep in their cockpits between scrambles, at readiness from before dawn to after dusk. Some were shot down in the morning and flew again in the afternoon. Some burned. Some fell into the Channel and drowned before rescue could find them. And among them flew pilots from across the world, Poles and Czechs who had already lost their countries and fought with a ferocity that stunned their British comrades, along with New Zealanders, Canadians, Australians, South Africans, Belgians, Free French, and a handful of American volunteers who had crossed an ocean to join a war that was not yet theirs. By late August, the strategy of hammering the airfields was working, better than the Germans themselves realized. The critical sector stations of the 11 Group, guarding London and the southeast, were being pounded toward collapse. Pilot losses outpaced replacements. The reserves were thinning. Squadrons rotated south from quieter sectors were sometimes cut to pieces within days of arriving. Training courses were slashed shorter and shorter, sending boys into combat with barely a handful of hours on the aircraft that had to keep them alive. Dowding and his commanders watched the arithmetic of attrition sliding toward disaster and understood, with cold clarity, that fighter command was approaching the edge. And then, at the very crisis of the battle, everything changed. In early September, the Luftwaffe abruptly shifted its weight away from the airfields and hurled its bombers at London itself. The reasons were tangled: rage at a British bombing raid on Berlin, faulty intelligence claiming fighter command was already finished, and the belief that attacking the capital would force the last British fighters into one final, annihilating battle. For the people of London, it was the beginning of an ordeal by fire, the Blitz. Night after night for months, the bombs fell on homes, docks, and churches, and tens of thousands of ordinary civilians, men, women, and children, would die beneath them before it ended. Their endurance through that horror became its own kind of front line, and it deserves to be remembered alongside the pilots who fought above them. But strategically, the shift to London was a catastrophic German blunder. The pressure lifted from the battered airfields at precisely the moment they were nearing collapse. Fighter command repaired its stations, rested its squadrons, rebuilt its strength, and kept rising day after day to tear at the bomber streams. The climax came on September the 15th. Göring launched 2 massive daylight assaults on London, still believing the RAF was down to its last handful of fighters. Instead, the German crews crossing the coast were met by wave after wave of British squadrons, including, over London itself, a massed formation of 5 squadrons attacking together, a sight German airmen had been assured was impossible. The Luftwaffe was mauled and driven back. The claim that fighter command was finished stood exposed as fantasy. In Britain, that day would come to be celebrated ever after as Battle of Britain Day. And 2 days later, Hitler quietly postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. The invasion barges gathered in the Channel ports began to disperse. There would be no landing. Though the night blitz would go on for months and the war for 5 more years, the Battle of Britain had been decided. For the first time somewhere, Hitler's war machine had been fought to a standstill, not by an army or a fleet, but by a few hundred young men and the system behind them. The cost was heavy on both sides. More than 500 fighter command pilots were killed in those months, from a force that had never been large, along with thousands of other airmen, bomber, and coastal crews among them, and the civilians dying under the night raids. The Luftwaffe lost close to 2,000 aircraft and their irreplaceable trained crews, losses that would shadow it for the rest of the war. Even before the battle's climax, as the fighting reached its fiercest pitch in August, Churchill had already spoken the sentence by which it would be remembered forever. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. And the debt was real. If fighter command had broken in September 1940, there was no ally left standing to take up the fight in the West. No Britain to serve as the base from which the liberation of Europe would one day be launched. No haven for the exiled airmen and soldiers of a conquered continent. The war, and the century, would have taken a darker road. Instead, the line held by ground crews working through the raids to patch and refuel the fighters, by the young women of the operations rooms, plotting raids with the bombs falling nearby, by radar operators, observers, gunners, firemen, and by Londoners climbing out of shelters each morning to go back to work. And held, above all, by the pilots, the ones who climbed, again and again, into a sky full of enemies until the enemy stopped coming. History owes one more honest footnote. Hugh Dowding, the architect of the victory, and Keith Park, the New Zealander who commanded 11 Group through the worst of it, were both quietly removed from their posts within months, pushed aside in bitter, internal disputes over tactics. The two men who had just saved their country received, at the time, barely a word of official thanks. Recognition came only later. History, at least, has been kinder to them than their own service was. Many of the few did not live to see the victory they bought. Their average age was 20. They were students, clerks, apprentices, farm boys, from Britain and from half the nations of the world, asked to hold the sky itself. And for one long summer, 5 miles above the green fields of England, they did. If this story moved you, if you believe the few, and all who stood with them, deserve to be remembered properly, then do one small thing for us. Tap that like button and subscribe to Historical Club so the next great story finds its way to you. Ring the bell, tell us in the comments which battle we should tell next, and we will see you on the next one.